All the leaves are brown and the sky.
Welcome to Next Move with Travis and Eric, and this is episode 4. And this conversation continues. And I'd like to highlight 1, 2, and 3 episodes. And the first one we talked about, okay, we have this blockchain and mutable data and recordation in software. So, cloud consensus node, that's only half the equation in episode 1. The other half is immutable data and hardware, and that's in SIM, secure silicon, that's in smart cards and phones and backup keys and so on and so forth. And episode 2 is, okay, we have this very now complete, not only secure environment, but a secure authentication execution environment, the world's first. And then we move into a situation where, okay, on episode 2, we said, okay, banks, what do they do with this? Well, now that we know it's secure and we know that we can identify people through mobile, then when they extend and use blockchain for tokenized deposits, really nothing really changes, and they may have all these wonderful advantages. And then moving into 3 with David Petrie on episode 3, we talked about, okay, now we're ready to do something. We wanted to focus on investments, but primarily the private capital lending, which is being teed up as the most sought after asset class for wealth funds and treasuries and hedge funds and private equities and so on. And there's a lot of advantages. And we actually talked about it. It's for lenders. It's better to have more clients with the same risk profile so they can auto rebalance and make advantage of those hedges. And then today on episode 4, and I want to start with making introductions. I'm Travis McGregor, your host on the show, and my co-host Eric Maloney. Say hi.
Hi, I don't know Eugene. Hi, Travis.
And Eric is in New York, and Eugene joins us from Singapore. Say hello, Eugene.
Hello, everyone. Hello, Travis. Hello, Eric. Pleasure to be here.
And I would like to kick this off because, the unlocking platform lending is sought after by every Wall Street, every investment, saying, how do we automate this? And what's happened in the marketplace and deploying this capital is, they'll get a clip of a large amount of money. They'll go after a sector like HELOCs or something, and it dries up. They're not having advantages. They're off. They're not using tokenized deposits. They're not making advantage of the full ecosystem of blockchain. And so what is how do they deploy capital? If you look at the episode 1, 2, and 3, now you're ready to deploy it. Is it always to the tier 1 and so on and so forth? And I say no. And here today, Eugene has a phenomenal background and so on in trade commerce and logistics and shipping and so on. And I was on with a gentleman who was chief data science, not to name names, of some pretty large financial institutions. And they said it comes down to individuals and the trust between them. So in this new era, Eugene, how can we look at maybe small to medium businesses in a different way and almost a community way to pull resources and so on? Please share with me your experience and your insight here.
Sure. Thanks, Travis. If you look at it traditionally now, people obviously go look to the banks, to get loans and so on and so forth, right, to get the funding. However, the small medium enterprises, they are not as sophisticated, right? Sometimes they could a one-man pop show or a small family, right? They are already startups. Every company will just come from that path. But obviously, if you look at the financial institutions, they start looking at your credit standings. They start looking at what is the background, what the assets that you have. But in cases of all these small medium enterprises, they do not. What they have is the greed. What do they have is the vision and the hard work, to execute that vision. Yeah. And I think this is really a group which has been denied. They really, whatever money they put into the financial institutions, but on the other hand, when at the time when they needed to get loans itself, the institutions will ask them to pledge even on their personal assets. So if you look at it again on the small medium enterprises itself, there is really not a demarcation between a corporate entity versus a personal.
That's important. Yes.
Yeah. So in this respect, if you look at it in today's world now, so what is the difference if I do a personal lending, right, to the individual? And if we go back even in the olden days when before the world gets more sophisticated, within the community, people are willing to lend to each other, which means that I think back in Singapore, even China days, there is a system called the tontine, where the group or community, every month they will just put in a sum of money and they indicate what is the interest that they want to lend, yeah, and the one with the highest bidder will get the pool of money, right? So that is in the simplest form of lending in the olden days, yeah. But likewise, if you look at it, the same concept can be applied. And the way I believe in today's context with the whole digitalization, with the blockchain, every individual's in terms of their personal data, in terms of the credit standing is there because everything is being governed. It's not in the days where you can just run wild and say that I take the money and I just go absconded and nobody can find me, right? So I think with this technology, it has actually helped in the sense whereby each individuals in terms of net worth, the credit standing, the issues and whatsoever, or the background would always be there. And likewise, if I assimilate the same thing for small, medium enterprises, you are actually looking at the person, the owner of the enterprises, right? And that is where that is a true enough credit standing to say whether or not is it credit worthy, right? In that respect, and not really going through the whole series, to get the credit scoring, so and so forth, which is not only burdensome, but at the same time, it creates a lot of obstacles, right? And it doesn't help in generating a more inclusive, like I said, economy. That's my
By the way, you blew me away. My mind is going in many different ways, and you trigger so much of stuff I'm very passionate about. And maybe Eric, when I look at that, and we have, and what it got down to, we started out, and Eugene, with technology, is that we can link those individual people and those small businesses and so on. And Eric, I mean, from your background, and we've known each other for a while now, is that how do you see this from technology, but also from a human process and business process? And with AI getting into it, we have a new world, that we have all these tools. I think best was Andreessen Horowitz, one of the executives there, saying we've got blockchain, we've got AI, we've got all these things. Why can't we make the world more inclusive and build the local economies? What are the gating factors in all that? Because all that needs to be in harmony. And if it is, people can live better, and we have enough money. So Eric, please.
So I want to play back what Eugene just mentioned, which is we're not reinventing capitalism, we're just reinvigorating it. If you go back to what are the big multinational, multi-billion-dollar companies today, they all started with an idea. Some individual or a small group of people understood an emerging market, understood local distribution, understood local needs, local talent, understood how to ship and store and build the supply chain and the ecosystems that would go into their vision of that market that they were creating. What I see is a lot of people say, oh, I want the silver bullet. I want AI just to do it for me. I want the blockchain to just, once it's figured out, it'll just be automatic. You can't ever disconnect from the human element. You have to start with human element. And that's
so important. Yeah.
And when you have somebody with those local insights and they're willing to make that personal investment, how do you enable them? How do you make it clear or transparent to potential investors what value these individuals bring to these emerging markets, to these niche markets that they're creating? And I think then you deploy the technology. Then the blockchain has an open ledger. There's some transparency. It can scale to very small investments, distributing risk and getting access to capital. It can scale as these companies scale. I mean, if you look at what happened in Bangladesh, Grameen Bank had very small loans to do things for just eggs and other livestock, right? Investing small amounts, and it created a whole new produce section. And then it scaled to cell services, and now the largest cell service in Bangladesh was through a selection of investors in Grameen, mostly women. And they found a way of influencing their economy in a very positive way. That's not the only example. It's just one of the more famous ones, right, that Mohammed Yusuf set up with Grameen Bank. I think what Eugene is pointing to is the world, especially in East Asia, Southeast Asia, is ripe for a lot of change. There are a lot of people who are literate in economics, but they don't have access to the tools. And the current larger banks are used to having their process and procedures, if you can find ways of assessing the value of that local knowledge, the ability to execute locally, and you can quantify in a business model what that could mean to an investor, it now becomes pretty transparent in a smart contract, what's expected, what's delivered, what's the value of it, what's the reward for all parties. Right? You can put a lot of things into that contract for social good, for continued education, for local expansion. And the last thing I want to say is if you start looking at these emerging markets, they generally perform much better yield than traditional markets. And if you look at like Bangladesh again, they've had like a 7% growth in GDP year over year over year for decades. Pretty enviable, especially if we start looking at the 2010s, where most everything was close to 0 or 2%. And then if you look at the wild fluctuations in China with the managed economy, you really want to start looking at these entrepreneurs, and now you assemble tools to support them. That's my perspective on this.
Well, what triggers in my mind, I did a lot of work in the early days, mobile telecom in Latin America, so Mexico all the way down. And what was I met the Coppel family, who Bon Coppel is the national retailer of, markets, grocery stores, but they also have the mobile network, and they introduced mobile money. They introduced micropayments, things like that, like you said, for eggs, so ladies been coming in there for years, buying the same, whatever it might be, paying in cash. We don't really, so it becomes very interesting when, as Eugene and both of you say, is that when we look at, expanding the reach and having the tools really, because I think that, a lot of the projects that I've seen that want to say, hey, we have a better mousetrap for doing credit assessment. They're trying to have all these algorithms find that people already in a database. We've overlooked, and they should have some money, and I know now in a lot of discussions that's not true. They shouldn't get the money, but there are true people not in that database. That like you said, the Micronesian Islands, Palau, guy could have a fishing great operation paid in cash for the last 100-year family thing, and everyone has to vouch to say, yeah, I pay all my employees every week. I pay for the nets. I have a trade at the market. And that's viable, and that's grassroots and stable, and that's where you can see that increase in GDP. Eugene, in this gap, and I want to go back to it, Sue. Is that really true? You think at 5 trillion is that small business should have money? Is that are the analysts is that too big a number? What do you think? I mean, global trade and GDP is what, 100 trillion, 115 trillion, something like that. What do you think, Eugene?
No, I think the figure is about right. I mean, if you look at it, right, especially if you look at the back again, the emerging economies here in the Asia part, I think generally now the small medium enterprises actually form the backbone of the economy. However, in terms of the recognition, it's not there, right? Because they are not the big boys where the financial institutions that take a look. But then if you collectively put this together, they are definitely a force to reckon with. And
Yes.
it's really a market that can be tapped.
Well, I mean, look at construction companies. My father, ran a construction company. A lot of things he did in his life, airlines and finance and everything else. And those guys, hard workers, solid day, manual labor, and they got paid in cash. So does the bank look at them? I mean, you have to start looking at the realities. They're building, in Manhattan, New York, they're building something, right, of real value and an asset. So they should be treated, even though they're not in that database in some regard. Please, Eric.
Yeah, but then if I may bring an analogy, I think if you look at this stage now, whether you go to YouTube, Instagram, or whatsoever, right? Just for example, restaurants, right? If nobody, you do not have a prominent person that goes in and gave a good review, nobody knows. But then this stage, if you start looking at YouTube or Instagram, the moment you have number of multiple likes, comments, suddenly the next few days you find that there will be a long queue. This is the power of the community, right? Because
now you're talking.
Right?
Yeah.
In the same note, because the way we were doing business today, it's just depending on the few analysts, right? But then if we bring it and expand it, it is not just that few person, it's actually the whole community. Whoever has dealt with the businesses, right? Whether the individual or the company will that come in, that actually will formulate a more, I would think, a credible assessment.
Eric, your thoughts?
So I like what you both said. I was raising my hand earlier because you made me think, Travis, about your dad's generation, and basically for the most part, our generation.
Yeah.
And it was a cash economy. And that means that the output was his only metric. That's the only thing people knew. He built a business.
Right.
They knew when money was successful, when the job was done.
Right.
If you start looking at blockchain and you start looking at having tokenization of assets using digital currencies, every step he takes, every employee he pays, every land lease he has,
Yeah.
everything is measurable. The metadata now exists. So every time you sign a smart contract and you get somebody some money, or you're starting to do your business process, you can now surface that information. So an investor will say, these people know what they're doing. They're taking this money and they're going from not only renting cell phone services, they now have a distribution network to have people in motorcycles bringing these out to villages, so they have an ability to have community services for phones so that people can't afford them. And then they're going to see, oh, now they're having satellite offices permanently in the villages, and they can see the trends and they can say who's making that happen.
Right.
So they're going to have a really good idea that some people have a business model that they're executing against, because all the metadata from the use of the distributed ledgers, the use of the smart contracts, is evidence of the business viability of all these different entrepreneurial projects that Eugene was just mentioning. So that visibility never really existed before. You always kind of had to wait for the outcome. And of course, at that point, it's a bit too late to invest, and the money wasn't really aiding those people who were innovating in time, all right? Nothing is easier to invest in than a successful company. But where's the great returns? They've already been successful without you.
Well, the metadata, we know each other for a long time, Eric, and I finally get it. I walk into a standard bank and I transfer some money digitally, and they always say, what's on the memo? You can put some on there or not. It could be, if it's suspicious, they'll ask you questions and fraud and so on. But at the end of the day, it's fully disconnected. If I'm sending money to people I'm working with all the time, and we're executing and customers and so on, and we don't tie all that together, I think that, and also it's like the tools. We can extend tools down to the mobile and so on to make it easier than having this large enterprise software system that to run, and that's not their human process, their business process. You don't want to sit down at a computer all day. They do different things. Very, very interesting. So Eugene, we have a few minutes here. Let's do maybe 2 more minutes. And as a wrap, Eugene and Eric, what do you see in the next few years? Do you see that this is just a beginning, we're scratching the surface, or do you think that with the right combination, we're going to, as they say, open the floodgates for opportunity to not create a new economy, as you said, Eugene, make it thrive, make it better, get people onto the grid, get them in the databases so they can extend lending and to build and to invest in their core business. Eugene, do you think this is 20 years out, or is it? I mean, we were talking about blockchain. I got involved, Eric, very early. First with Ethereum, we're sitting in Microsoft's offices. But is it a reality now? Because everyone's been pitching this stuff for a decade or more. So, what do you think? 2 years, year, 10? I mean, what do you think?
I'm no prophet, but I don't think the timeline will be 20 years. I mean, looking at the speed of how technology has come in. I mean, everyone talking about, we've got ChatGPT, AI, and things like that, right? The other thing that I feel that what could possibly slow down is really the regulation. Yeah. The issue is because with the whole crypto and the whole blockchain thing in the past has created with no sort of governance in it. There will always be cases of scams and so on and so forth, but that should not be the deterrent. So the only thing in my view that could actually stop the wave is only with the governmental regulation and intervention. Yeah. But if we are able to convince and able to bring up a sensible, credible sort of plan and say that look, there is no, I would say there will always be risk. But the thing is that the good thing is that by building an ecosystem, including with the credit scoring, including the insurance, the same thing, you are able to build the same, right? I mean, it's just like any traditional, because today the banks, they are also being reinsured, right? They have to put in that certain level of that insurance part to cover, right, for whatever losses. Likewise, yeah. So long as the due diligence is being done, there is a certain protective, especially onto the lenders itself. I think this should be the next thing. I will say I probably within this decade. Yeah, I think that.
Well, thank you for that, Eugene. And Eric, here's over the last month or so, you've used a term and it's really changed my perspective. Eugene's talking about maybe a slow or delay in all this could be regulatory side. Are we really in AI time? And from your perspectives, you brought that concept to me. We are, the Moore's law is out the window. Things are, like Eugene said, it triggered a note, and maybe you could wrap on AI time. I mean, things are moving really, really, you have to be really sharp and very holistically, looked at. So please, as a wrap, let me know what you mean in this new era of computing.
So what we talked about in AI time is, we compare it to internet time, right? Everyone was raving with the dot-com bubble. Hey, we can do something in weeks that used to take months.
Right.
Well, yeah, there's something in minutes or hours that used to take weeks. AI time is near real time. It can process that quickly, right? So a question of efficiency and to purpose. My vision is, we're already, the old saying, the future is now. We're already seeing the capabilities here. To the regulation, as Eugene brought up, he's in Singapore. Singapore is very progressive in crypto regulation. They're starting to draft their AI regulation. UK turned a corner 3-4 years ago. They were really hesitant about crypto. They're more or less supportive. Germany is turning that way very quickly. Switzerland's very progressive. So I think the US is starting, lawsuits aside, it's in the Treasury Department and others, you're starting to see that it's inevitable that it will be crypto. We talked about in previous episodes that internal to the big institutions, they're already using blockchain. What's really different now with AI is democratizing these platforms.
Yes.
Because think of AI as a UI. It's a nice, simple interface, natural language interface.
Right.
So it's for what Eugene and I were just talking about for the last several minutes. People in these emerging markets can also leverage that AI.
True.
It's not just that the investors get this
Never
view.
thought of that. Yep.
They are going to have this full loop. Now they can reflect. Yeah, I had this much money. I used it this way. I had a bit more. I could use it better. I don't need any more money. The analytics is there. My market, can I scale it beyond this district to the nation or something else that they want to do? They can start modeling. They can postulate really great prompts, and they're going to get some insights. And that's something that will show their progression that has value that they can then turn around and show to potential investors, create a market and create a capital appeal. So we're starting to see a set of capabilities that weren't available to your father's generation. They weren't available to us until about 3 years ago. We're at the beginning of the beginning, but it's really quite promising. And I think the people who have the least clutter about how they can transform are those people in the emerging markets. If you're looking at the West, in the West, they're saying, well, how do we do that yet completely protect all the margins and all the things we currently produce at the scale we currently produce? And the answer is, you're going to have to eat some of your own children. You're going to have to give up some things. You're going to have to put your margin at risk if you want to create net new opportunities and find new markets. So I think it's an amazing time, and there's a lot to learn from what's going on in the markets Eugene's talking about, and it's going to benefit all economies over time. It's a new form of globalization through democratization of the financial services.
Oh, that's a beautiful wrap, guys. Really, gentlemen, thank you so much. This is a wrap on episode 4, and stay tuned for episode 5. Thank you, gentlemen, and have a wonderful day. Take care now.
Thank you, Travis. Thank you, Eugene.